Hi, yes, please confirm you can hear me and loud and clear so we can get started into it.
Yes, I can hear you, Jamal.
All right. Hi, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Alima. Today we'll be having Ife as uh, as our speaker today. Ife is somebody that I've worked with and also that I have learned from. To even be precise, I have stole from in terms of strategy work and framework and all of that stuff. I feel really sort of like cool in terms of bringing out ideas and all of that. I think I had a session with him one time where we created some of the ideas I had, and it was a very enjoyable session with him. So I'm sort of excited to have him on this class today to take us on this what it means to take research and take it into an insight that you can build your campaign on, build your strategy on, and all of that. So welcome, Ife. Welcome to Strategy Hour. Thank you for doing this with us. I'm going to just hand over to you. You are in control of the class, and however you want to guide us is in your hand. So we usually have 1 hour. If the class is very interesting and we couldn't finish up, maybe the guys usually vote on, oh, let's use another extra minutes if you allow it, but usually our time is 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jamal. Hi, everyone. Please can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. I'm also going to share my screen. Uh, right. So please confirm you can see what's on the screen as well. All right, cool. So yeah, thanks a lot, Jamal. It's a real pleasure to be here. I know this as we've had this conversation for a while, but yeah, finally here. And happy to take us through, like Jamal said, how we move from research into insights. And what I call it is from data to gold. A little bit about me. I currently work as a creative strategist at Moniepoint. Used to lead strategy at Noah's Ark. But yeah, decided to move a little bit. So I don't believe I'll take a lot of your time because at the very foundation of this is something that everyone already does right now. But I like to believe that a majority of us here are strategists, copywriters, particularly in the creative space, right? So it's simply a thing of trying to understand what I believe is the best way to make really great campaigns to move from that data heavy perspective into something that truly inspires creativity. So I'm really hoping that you guys love using the chat box because at some point in time there will be a couple of questions, and I really love to hear the perspective of everyone because the thing about what we do or when it comes to insights, creativity is that it's highly subjective. And just because I'm the one giving the class doesn't necessarily mean that I know it all. So very open to suggestions and questions, whatever you guys might have. So by the end of this session, we'll know how to move from research findings into insights. We'll know how to spark big ideas. We'll know how to work with creatives, and we'll know how to couch insights that inspire. So I need to apologize in advance. I don't have any spectacular deck design skills. Most of what you'll be seeing is plainly black and white. So apologies for that. Yeah, so you don't have to wait till the end to ask questions. You can ask questions anytime. I'll be happy to answer. Try to limit distractions. It can get tricky at some point in time. So try to stay as focused as possible. And of course, bring your curiosity. So before going into what it is we have to talk about, um, I think Ibrahim says he can't hear me. Is that the same for everyone else?
No, I can hear you here.
Okay, I guess that's from Ibrahim's end. All right, so a brief history, strategy, planning, creative strategy, whatever you want to call it, um, started from these two companies, right? You have G. Walter Thompson, where they believed, or as at the time where they created the account planning department, it was very big on strong media and single source research that was underpinned by qualitative study. And then you have BMP, whereby strategy or account planning involved working with creatives, researching rough ideas, testing, and finding ways to make them better. So, yes, we work in a primarily creative industry, but research has always been very numbers heavy, very data heavy, and very research heavy. So, research has always been a big part of creative strategy. And over time, we've more than earned these stereotypes, particularly when you have that big title on LinkedIn saying brand strategies, creative strategies. It sounds heavy, right? And so, more often than not, we see ourselves as that Sherlock Holmes type of person, looking for the insights, looking for the data, digging deep. We love to talk about it. It's something that feeds our ego, right? But a lot of times, and it's something that I see from strategists, whether you've been in the industry for 10 years, whether you're just coming in, a lot of times there's that overinflated self of sense of importance rather, and so we see ourselves as the smartest guys in the room, right? But when we do the research, we come back with the deck. Account managers tend to just see us as those guys who put together the Microsoft PowerPoint documents and then come to hobo everyone or bullshit everyone, for lack of a better word. Clients will typically see us as those guys that like to stand up in front of in front of the audience, in front of the people in the meeting room, and then just feel ourselves and talk in a way that we feel ourselves and we really enjoy what we're saying. Creatives a lot of times see us as those guys that just combine data, and just come to confuse them. And consumers would oftentimes see us as those guys, particularly if we do a lot of field research, are those guys who just disturb them for information when they are in a hurry or something, right? So the temptation with research is it's very easy to just have numbers and graphs and then more numbers. You're trying to impress people, trying to show people that, hey, I've been researching for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and I need to show the evidence of my work, right? But what I would often lead to is a presentation or a doc that just puts people asleep, right? You're not even done with the presentation. You see people using their phones, everybody's bored out of their minds, and then you end up presenting to people who are not paying attention and they're just waiting for the good parts, which is the creative executions many times. What people often miss is strategy, primarily creative strategy, because we are in a creative environment, doesn't just use the right side of the brain, which is all about rational thinking, analytical thinking, logical thinking, numbers. I believe that's the left side of the brain. We also use the other part of the brain, which is being very emotional, being very intuitive, being very imaginative, and of course, being very sensory as opposed to simply knowing about numbers. So it's how you're able to balance these two things that make you a great strategist, right? And so when it comes to insights, the origins of an insight will typically be found in the numbers. You can't escape the research. You can't escape the numbers. That's how we know that an insight is not just fluff. That's how we know that it's actually the reality. That's how we know it has substance. That's how we know that it can be tested, it can be replicated, and when the eventual work comes out, that's how we know that it's going to work. But the problem with numbers is numbers seldom sing, right? They do not sing. You put numbers, you put charts, you put graphs on the PowerPoint slide, and yes, they provide information, but they do not sing. And that's when we need to call on words as strategists. We need to know how to use words, being provocative, being allegorical, words that liberate the information and give it potency. So you see me use that word a lot, potency, right? So say you've done your quantitative research, you've done your qualitative research, whatever it is. Um, again, quantitative research gives you surface level patterns, it gives you breadth on the subject, it just gives you that information that you need to identify patterns, whether you leverage online data, numbers, whether you leverage questionnaires, whatever the case. And then you have the qualitative research as well that tries to understand why patterns exist and gives you depth on a subject. You're able to dive deeper into a subject and really understand it. So whether it's in-depth interviews, whether it's focus group discussions, whether it's ethnography research, again, these are just all the things that I would like to assume that everybody knows. So I won't go so much into it. And then it's time to put in that dreaded slide that says this is the insight. But the question is, what is an insight? Um, Funny enough, I was going through LinkedIn this morning, and there was an article on LinkedIn that talked about how insights are the most misused words in advertising. Unfortunately, I couldn't read the article because you know that thing LinkedIn does that you see something at the very top and then you wait for like 2 seconds and it disappears. I tried to look for it, but unfortunately, I couldn't find it. So, insights are unspoken truths, right? Again, I'm sure you've heard about this before. What does it mean to be? What does it mean for something to be unspoken? First of all, it means that it makes people see things in a different way or a new light because you know it, but you rarely speak it, right? So it needs to feel new. If it's not new, it's usually just an observation. And they are truths because they are not presumptive, they are not contrived. You don't fetch it out of thin air. It's based off of something that you've been able to research. They don't just feel true, they are true, right? And Julian Cole, which I'm sure a lot of you follow, says an insight is a revelation that makes us look at the world in a different way. An insight is something that provokes a reaction in us. But the interesting thing about insight is we're all adults, we all have brains, you can define it however you want, right? But to really dive deep into what it is I have for you guys today, and I would love for a bit of participation here. I'll probably give it like a minute, 2 minutes. Let's do a quick exercise: insight versus observation. So I have 6 sentences, six whatever you want to call it here, and some are insights, some are not insights. Based on what we understand so far, and based on what we've known previously to this point, I'm really interested in seeing which one you guys believe are insights. So the first one we have is through the eyes of toddlers, dog poop looks like an appetizing dessert. We have B, Gen Z and millennials spend more time online than previous generations before. C, moms are busy and on the go. D, flair is simply confidence expressed consistently on the football pitch or on the football field. E, automatic store checkouts make shoppers do the jobs of employees for no pay. And F, people are bombarded with choice in their everyday lives. So real quick, I'll be looking through the comment section to see what we believe are insights and what we believe are observations. So if you believe the insights are B, C, E, you can put it there. If you believe the observations are, I mean, however you guys will answer. Really curious to see what you guys think. And yeah, no judgments, just respond however you believe is right. So I'll just give it like a minute and we'll see some of the responses. So over to you guys. It's not complicated. Don't overthink it. Just put it in as you say it. All right. So Omoye says B is an insight. A Angelo says A is an insight. Okay. Praise says B, D, and E are insights. Joshua says E and A are insights. Okay. B is an observation. All right, cool. Keep it coming, guys. Really interesting point of view so far. C is an observation. B is an insight. Okay. All right. So I'll just give it about 10 more seconds. D is an insight. F is an insight. C is an insight. E is an insight. Think a lot of different thoughts. You know, the interesting thing about this is for the guys who are saying certain things are insights, if I give you guys an opportunity to defend why you believe is an insight, you will most likely be able to defend it to a large extent, right? Um, but there's a reason why I'm taking the class. So when I look at these sentences, B is an observation because there's nothing unspoken about it. There's nothing new about it. It's something that everybody knows. Obviously, Gen Z and millennials are going to spend more time online than previous generations. It goes without saying. C is obviously an observation because moms are busy and on the go. It's nothing new. F, people are bombarded with choices in their everyday lives. People are always bombarded with choices in their everyday lives. There's absolutely nothing new about that. But you take a look at A that says, through the eyes of toddlers, dog poop looks like an appetizing dessert. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes surrounded by children or surrounded by babies would know that you cannot leave a child alone for 1 minute, 2 minutes. Any single thing they see, they will put it in their mouth, right? So imagine seeing a data that lets you know that um, 90% of babies tend to eat random things in the first 3 years of their birth, right? Or a data that tells you if you leave a child for 5 minutes, they will put five things in their mouth, right? So that is a piece of data, that is a piece of information, right? Based on research that you've probably done or someone else has done, right? And that's where insights then come in, particularly within the context of creative advertising. Insights at the very foundation of what they mean is geared towards a creative execution, right? It is geared towards making advertising more creative, making advertising more believable. It gives a direction. It turns on the light bulb, for lack of a better word, right? There's a very interesting article that talks about why insights are like refrigerators. And the reason why insights are like refrigerators is that when you open it, a light comes on, right? So I give a creative team something that says, through the eyes of toddlers, dog poop looks like an appetizing dessert. What that gives them is something to play with, right? What that gives them is space to play around with how I've been able to couch this bit of information. And the same can be said to D, which is flair, it's simply confidence expressed on the pitch. You see, if you're a football fan, you see players like Neymar, you see players like Ronaldo, who always bring that flair to the pitch. And you ask, why do these guys do it more than others? And it's because they have so much confidence on the ball. And when you try to attempt a dribble and it doesn't work, people are going to boo you. You're going to see the stats that talk about this person tried to dribble 20 times and he only succeeded 5 times, right? For a regular everyday individual, that is going to discourage you from wanting to try anything spectacular on the field the next day, right? But this guy still consistently go out every single day and then be as flourish as possible, right? And you ask yourself, why is this the case? That's the power of an insight. It makes you understand that, hey, when it comes to these guys, it's mostly about confidence. And the same thing with option E as well, right? So again, insights make creative work more believable because at the end of the day, the reason why you're putting your insights on the deck is because you're trying to inspire your creative team. You're not trying to bore them to death. You're trying to make sure that the work that they bring out is not only believable, but it's highly creative as well. So take a look at this information. 70% of people who drive on the road tend to be distracted, while 20% tend to be unqualified to drive on the road, right? Again, very, very interesting piece of information. You've probably done a research, pan Nigeria, pan the world, whatever, and this is what you're able to get. Now, you have this kind of information, and I would play a TV, and then you ask yourself, how can this piece of information inspire something like this? I can guarantee you that this wasn't what the creative team saw that inspired this campaign. So I'll play it. That way we have an understanding of what it is I'm trying to talk about.
Isn't it rich? Are we prepared? Leave the last on the ground. You will be there. Send in the clowns. Where are the clowns? Send in the clowns. Just when I'd stopped opening sending the clowns. Don't bother, they're here.
So the question is, how on earth does something like this inspire something like this? The truth is, it doesn't, right? As a strategist, you've probably done the research and you've discovered that 70% of people who drive on the road tend to be distracted, while 20% tend to be unqualified to drive on the road. That is a perfectly fine piece of information, right? But it doesn't inspire anything. When I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool, that's interesting. But when it's time for me to start thinking of a creative way to express this, it becomes very difficult, right? And then imagine, as a creative strategist, I have this piece of information, but then I write it like this. When driving, the real danger isn't always you, it's everyone else you share the road with. This was a campaign that ran in, I believe, was in the US, or I mean, somewhere in the West, right? But this is a campaign that you can bring to Nigeria and it's going to work. Not necessarily because the data would be exactly the same thing, but when it's couched as an insight, it is insightful. One of the first things I was told when I started driving was be a very defensive driver because everybody on the road is mad, right? And you can easily interpret that to say, hey, the road danger isn't me, it's everyone else I share the road with. So it then becomes very easy to have an idea space that talks about how the world is full of clowns or the world is full of mad people. But Audi technology makes you clown proof. Again, that's where the role of the brand comes in, right? But again, that's not the class for this. So you see how you need to move beyond the information that you get and the research that you get, and then write it in such a way that it inspires something. This is another very interesting example. But again, I'll leave it for potentially you guys can get the deck and you can take a look at it. That way I don't take too much of your time. But this is also a very popular one. It's pretty short, so I'll play it. And one of the exercises I love to do is I look at ads, I look at campaigns, I look at things that I see, and I try to ask myself, what was the insight behind this, right? What was the insight that sparked an idea like this? Again, it's a very good exercise to do. Again, it helps you expand your creative mind. But yeah, let's take a look at this real quick.
How about we play this next hand with the Joker?
How about the Joker plays with you? You cut. Da, 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 da. Whoever draws the ace of spades wins the night out. That window.
Darren? Have a Snickers.
Why?
Because you get a little bit crazy when you're hungry.
I'm not crazy. I'm just differently sane.
Better? Better.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
I want to reshuffle.
So again, I'm sure a lot of us have seen this, but it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to believe that the insight was around you're not you when you're hungry. Potentially it was written in a different way, but I'd like to assume it was written in that manner, right?
How about
So this man is called Jeff Boomer. He started his career in 1954, I believe. He's late now. But again, you imagine that he knows what he's talking about. Jeremy Boomer, rather. And he says that insights can be broadly categorized into two. You have the high potency insights and you have the low potency insights. Product satisfaction arises less from inherent construction and performance than from consumers' internalized perceptions of personal utility. I'll read that again. Product satisfaction arises less from inherent construction and performance than from consumers' internalized perceptions of personal utility. Right? So the more you read it, it starts to get a little bit easier to understand what this person was trying to say. right? You read it a couple more times and then you understand it. It's something that you can put on a deck because based on your research, you've been able to find out that product satisfaction arises less from inherent construction and performance than from consumers' internalized perceptions of personal utility. But what you wouldn't have found it to be is inspiring, memorable, actionable, or evocative. And that's what Jeremy Bullmore describes as a low potency insight. What it does is that it smothers the truth in complex, boring jargon, and it just sits somewhere on the PowerPoint slide, moving absolutely nobody to any sort of enlightenment, let alone action. And this is something that we as strategists love to do a lot. We've been told that we are supposed to be the smartest in the room. We've been told that we're supposed to be the ones who have the data and the information. But the mistake in that is it leads to a very overinflated sense of self-importance. And then we start to try to impress everybody with our use of English language and our use of data. And then you have people don't want quarter inch drills, they want quarter inch holes. And this is what is described as a high potency insight, right? It might take you a couple more reads to understand what it really means, but the moment you understand it, ideas start to fly at the back of your head. What it simply means is that people are not so much after the product, but they're after what the product can help them achieve or what the product can help them do. Is the exact same information as the product satisfaction, blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah. But while one is quite confusing, the other brings that sense of, oh, wow, that's pretty true. I'm not interested in the product. I'm interested in what the product helps me do. This was something that led to a very popular campaign back in the early days, right? But what I'm trying to drive at is the value of an insight depends not just on its originality or its accuracy or its length of research or its depth of research. It primarily depends on the potency of its expression, right? So where the low potency insight will typically fail in that instant heart-lifting revelation, where it never elicits any sort of immediate exultant response that, oh yes, that's how it is. That's what a high potency insight would do. So therefore, an insight isn't just what you find out, it's how you interpret it. So what it means is that the best insights are objectively gotten, but they are subjectively written. 5, 10, 20, 50 people can find the same set of information from the same set of people, right? But they can all express it in different ways because, again, we all have brains and we are all able to interpret different things out of the world. There's a book by, I believe it's McPullard, that says strategy is your words. And I believe that's what he's trying to tell us here, that your ability to inspire creativity, your ability to get the very best work, the ability to transform, boring research into something that sparks something very interesting, is not simply how you get the information, it's how you write it and it's how you pass it across. So for an insight to have real potency, literal accuracy is less important than its power to evoke. So it's that ability to evoke a type of reaction from your creative team, from your client, from whatever, that separates the best creative strategies from the ones that typically just bore people to death, right? And some ways to start is some people will tell you that, hey, just keep asking why, right? You find a piece of information, ask why, ask why, ask why, ask why. I think they call it the 5 whys, and that's my problem with frameworks more often than not, is that it's very easy to just use it without understanding why it's being done, right? And the problem with just asking why and why and why and why is that you're hoping that the consumer tells you something that you're supposed to get yourself. Sometimes it works, and sometimes you just keep asking why and why and why and why until the person doesn't even know what to say anymore, right? So for some people this works. For some people it doesn't. It has never really worked for me. I don't know why. Um, and some others would say, take a writing course. right? This was something my former boss used to say, that the best strategists are writers, because their deck or their strategy or planning doesn't just provide information, right? It inspires, it tells a story, and your insight is supposed to do something similar as well. And then another thing is just to chill out. You're a strategist, you're an account planner. Yes, you've been told that you're the smartest in the room. Don't let it get to your head. And I can assure you that you're not the smartest in the room. I've been in the room with a couple of very brilliant copywriters that their IQs far surpass any strategist. So it's not about the big words. It's not about how well you can impress people, right? It's your ability to inspire. Mark Pollard believes that insights take turns, and it's something that I found that if you look at some of the best insights ever, they typically take a format like this, right? Because at the end of the day, it's reframing what people typically think is the case versus what actually is the case. That new revelation. So Mark Pollard says to write an insight, it's dash is dash, right? Dash isn't dash, dash when dash, dash but dash. I'll give an example, or he gave an example. It says, again, insights take turns, right? So it's how you are able to link something that we already know, which is X, and turn it into Y, right? People don't want this, they want this. When people buy data, they're not buying the megabytes, they are buying the most important things in their lives, right? Boldness is achievement. Dash is dash. Again, it's that ability to take something that people would typically see on the surface and then bring in a new information behind it. Again, I know that this part is a little bit technical, so again, I'll just try to take it slowly. Um, and I'll use the example that so many times we see boldness as something bad, right? That is how we've been taught to see boldness, right? But then you take a look at a lot of the richest people in the world, and a lot of these guys are bold, right? So imagine a brand is trying to do something for bold guys. What you're able to do is that you then reframe what boldness means to get people to have a double take. To say, oh, yeah, you're actually right. That's how it is. Because more often than not, you see a bold person, right? It can be interpreted that because you've been able to work so hard, you've been able to make so much money, boldness has then become an achievement. And then this is something that can inspire creativity, right? The data could potentially say 60% of bald men, tend to be highly successful, right? Or highly successful men tend to be bald. You can then write it in such a way that inspires something. You can also say X is not this, X is this. Boldness isn't failure, boldness is success, right? And you'll see that growing up, we used to churn out insights randomly for a living, right? Where they say, someone has a big stomach, and you say it's a sign of healthy living, right? At some point in time, that would have been a new revelation, right? But over time, because it has been used so often, it has become general knowledge, so it no longer qualifies as an insight, right? But in terms of wanting to have some sort of cheat sheets of how insights potentially work, I believe this does a very brilliant job at it. So X is Y, X is not this, X is Y. When boldness happens, success happens too. People think boldness is failing, but it's a sign of success. I mean, it goes on and on and on, but you can see a recurring theme all around, all across. It's reframing something that we've always known to be one thing into something else, right? So again, when it comes to insights, these are things that people learn over the course of a long career. So I'm not expecting everyone to get it today, right? But again, it's just a way to get you thinking of, hey, have I been thinking about insights wrongly all this time? And then also having that little bit of desire to read more about it and then learn more about it. And of course, trial and error is also very important. You're not always going to get it right. You're not always going to get that reaction that you want. But I think you owe it to yourself to at least try, because that is where the truly brilliant campaigns tend to come from, right? But yeah, getting these insights can be very intimidating sometimes. So someone somewhere has given us a way out, in the sense of sometimes all you need is a truth, whether it's a human truth, whether it's a societal truth, whether it's a cultural truth, whatever you want to call it, right? So even if you want to call it a truth, it needs to be something revealing, it needs to be something interesting, it needs to be something provocative, and it needs to be something that is often overlooked. It could be something about life, it could be something about the consumer, something about the category, whatever, you know. But again, insights can be very intimidating. So sometimes having a societal truth on the deck, where you don't have to worry about how you write it, but you just need to worry, whether it's revealing, whether it's interesting, whether it's provocative, or whether it's something that people, often overlook. And a very good example is it's a Tide ad. I'm sure we've all seen it at some point in time, whereby they had discovered some media truth about how a lot of Super Bowl ads will typically have clean clothes, right? And then they just use that truth, which is something quite interesting, to make into this very interesting campaign, right? But regardless of what you choose to call it, it does need some potency. Like Jeremy let us understand, it needs to be high potency. It needs to be something that evokes something in the minds of people that read it, right? And that's because, at the very foundation of every single thing we do as strategists, it's all about effective creative work. And while we don't always want to admit it, effective work can happen without us, but it's more likely to happen faster with a strategy. So your job is to be that one person that makes effective creative work happen faster. And one of the best ways to do it, one of the best ways to achieve that, is to inspire creativity. And insights help us do that. So if you take everything that I've talked about today, you read it, you mule on it, you add some more information on it, I can guarantee you that you begin to, or you become that person that your creatives love working with, because you make their jobs a whole lot easier, not by boring them with data and information, or by being able to subjectively write those data, that information, into something that inspires something in there. So some pretty interesting reads, and I'm hoping Jamal would share the link with everyone. Um, the article, "Why is a Good Insight Like a Refrigerator?" published in 2005, really, really interesting, really breaks down this whole insight conversation. And then by Mike Pollard, "Mastering Insights," also a very, very interesting read. Again, these are things that would definitely help in trying to understand insight and turn that data, turn that boring research into something interesting. So that's my bit. Thanks for listening, everyone rather. So yeah, open for questions if there are any. So Jamal, over to you. I don't know what typically comes next, but I'm trying to
I
put
mean,
the links
I
to.
mean, yeah. So I think it's more of I will get the document from you and share to the class. But I think it's more of if people have question. If they don't have, I have a question.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I
Go
mean,
right ahead. But I think someone else had raised up a hand.
yes, somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's Halima. Jamal, why not let Halima go first?
Okay, thank you. If this is actually the second time I'm attending the session that you're speaking on. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. So I want my question is basically what happens in a situation where it feels as though every form of information that you get or that you're perceiving as an insight is actually an observation and like it's not new information. Okay, ma, it's not new information, right? What, how then do you move past that stage? Because I'm actually struggling with that at the moment, and it's just like I'm just not acting the insight. Let me just put it that way, right? So in situations like that, I don't know if you've been in that kind of situation. What is the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, very, very interesting question, and I think it's something that at some point everyone runs into, right? But I think it has more to do with the research being carried out. Like my previous boss would always tell me that whenever I carry out a research that is not interested in everything I found out, that he only wants me to tell him one thing. What is the most interesting thing that I found out? And the most interesting thing that you found out could be an observation. More often than not, it's not, but it could be an observation. But it is interesting to you, right? And of course, it would be interesting to him. So once you're able to find something interesting, it's a little bit easier to then turn that interesting thing into an insight by writing it, of course, in a subjective manner, right? Because remember what I said, 50 people can do the same research and find the same thing, right? But what separates each of them from one another is the ability to write it subjectively in such a way that you still maintain the information, you still maintain the truth, but it's written in such a way that it inspires something, right? So even if you find out things that, yeah, everybody knows, it's nothing absolutely new, but as long as it is interesting to a large extent, you are then able to couch it in such a way that it inspires something. And there are also situations whereby you're able to find out that piece of information that is an observation, but then you're able to reframe it in such a way that it no longer feels like something that everybody knows. And I'll give you an example, just off the top of my head. There was a time we were working on a campaign for, it was for a breakfast brand. It was for a breakfast brand, yeah. I can't remember exactly which was it, but everybody there couldn't agree on the best time to eat breakfast because we were trying to do the campaign in such a way that it's the ideal time that everybody eats breakfast. Some people said, "Hey, I have breakfast by 7." Some people say, "Hey, I have breakfast by 8." Some people say, "Hey, I have breakfast by 9." Some people say, "I have it by 11." Again, everybody would typically, or most people would typically have breakfast at some point in the day, right? What my boss was able to do was able to bring together all of that information to say that, hey, this is something very interesting. Everybody agrees that breakfast is important. Everybody agrees that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but nobody can agree on the exact time to have breakfast, which was very, very interesting, right? Again, I can't remember how we then reframed that to put on the deck, but that is how a piece of information that everybody knows, everybody has breakfast, you can still find something interesting from there just by, I don't know, listening better, by taking some time to think about it, and ultimately, write it in a way that inspires something. So, hope I've been able to answer your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure thing. Joshua, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for this class. So while you were answering Alima's question, I remembered one of a particular scenario whereby I felt like I had nailed this thing. I've finally gotten the insight. There was that moment where I could just feel it, but I sort of came across um another brand within that same category run an ad. This was after I got like my own insights, run a campaign, and it felt like, oh, it was the insight I got that their own idea was built on. I just saw it and it felt like, this was what I just thought about. And it looks like, oh, these people probably thought about the same thing, and it is the foundation of their campaign.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that kind of, oh, is this something that still you can still roll with? It's not in the same location. Um, it's probably not the same people you are talking to, right? But it just felt like, oh, these guys, we most likely have the same thought process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the beauties of working in an industry like ours. Like for every original idea that you believe you have, someone probably has had it in the past, right? It happens regularly, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or that there's anything wrong with your head, because at the end of the day, patterns exist for a reason. The same patterns you've seen, someone else has likely seen it, and that's why insights do not work in isolation, right? I'll take you back to the Audi example, right? This is an insight that anybody can come up with. It's not that big a deal, right? But where the difference then starts to come in between one campaign and the next campaign is how it's then interpreted from the lens of the brand and then the subsequent creative idea that comes out of it. That's why we don't work in isolation, we work with other people. For Audi, this information that I have here with the 70% and the subsequent insights, um, another brand will probably have done something that leverages something like this. But where Audi comes in is in the role of the brand, in quotes, which is where Audi technology comes in, and of course the creative idea of making something clown proof. So again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. You can have the same research and the same approach and probably the same insight of someone else, right? But that's where your job as a strategist then comes in to add other elements to it, where the brand comes in, how you then interpret it into your proposition or whatever you want to call it in such a way that it's ownable by the brand you're working on and then it's distinctive. So all the other elements work together. It's not all about the insight every single time, but it is very important.
I the class
Right.
ends in
Thank
just. Do we want to like extend it?